So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Mader. I'm with Deloitte Consulting, and it's my pleasure this afternoon to moderate our first panel discussion, which is Destination 2025, Reassessing Financial Trends in an Uncertain World. When we think about the last several years, I think there are three key areas that have significantly impacted how organizations have been doing business and will do business over the next couple of years. The first is digital disruption. The second is data analysis transformation. And the third is the evolving workforce and operating models. This afternoon, I'm pleased to moderate the panel with four very distinguished and accomplished executives from across our community. And I'd like to start by asking each to do an introduction of who they are, their title, and just a minute or two about why this topic is important to them. And then we're going to launch into the series of questions, and I would encourage the audience to please participate using the application for questions for the panel. So let me start with Tammy for the first introduction, then we'll go to Lynn and Fernandez and to James. Tammy.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Perriello. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Transformation and Modernization at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. These types of technologies in my role are applicable because part of what my responsibilities include are taking innovative solutions to the enterprise level. So we have an opportunity at Fiscal Service to try and pilot modernization and changes that are potentially disruptive, but certainly transformative. And part of what we're trying to do is make those available bureau-wide, department-wide, and then government-wide where that's appropriate.
Okay, I guess I'm up next. Lynn Money, I'm the Deputy CFO at USDA. And so this topic has definitely some significance to me because, you know, we're not only a traditional CFO shop, but we have a large footprint in the shared services space. So, you know, you think about Grant Cardone about 10X. I mean, I think everything we have to 10X it because it's not just for our own individual organization, but it's across the government. And so we are constantly looking for ways to modernize, to become more effective and efficient, and looking at these trends and trying to get ahead of the curve is very important to the success of our organization.
Thank you, Lynn. Fernandez.
Hello, I'm Fernandez Boards, Deputy CFO at the Census Bureau. The reason why this is especially important to me is as we look at our organizations, we are asked to do so much more these days and with not a lot more people. And these technologies that we have and things of this nature really help us to really get the mission done and support the mission that we do at the same time. And as we transition into this trusted advisor role is what I like to say about the CFO shop is becoming more of a trusted advisor. Mm-hmm. It's going to require us to do less of this data entry type of work, but more of these use more of these technologies to be that trusted advisor to our program folks that really help them enable the mission. So this is why this is very important to me.
Thank you, Fernandez. Jay.
Good afternoon. I'm Jay Tyler. I'm the CFO for the Food and Drug Administration. And this topic certainly resonates with me. FDA is in the forefront of the ongoing pandemic. We have a huge remote workforce. We certainly have to leverage new technologies, modernize our business processes to be able to deal with the current public health crisis, but also looking toward the future. I think this protracted remote working environment and introduction of new technologies to facilitate said new working environment has, shed new light on, how we're going to have to work in the future. And I really think, CFO organizations have to be strategic partners at the table. We have to look beyond just, reporting and providing a monthly snapshot. I think we have to leverage predictive analytics. we're inundated with data. We have to be reactive to that data and be able to leverage data to inform decision making and make sure that we stay relevant and that we're an innovator aligned with mission. So again, that's why this topic is really important for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. We want to continue the conversation around technology and disruption. And this is a question that we'll start maybe with Lynn first, but I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about, over the last couple of years, what do you think has been the most disruptive technology and or business process, and how has that impacted how you do your business? Maybe Lynn, starting with you.
So when you say the most disruptive technology, from my perspective, obviously we've been, still going through, but we've been through this pandemic phase since 2020. And as Jay said, we're now mostly remote, right? So it's really being able to still provide mission delivery at the same or even better, right, in terms of meeting customer needs at that level. So when I look at, our NFC, the National Finance Center, which pays many agencies, probably some including sitting in this room, retirement processing is like, so we're trying to figure out the balance between how do we move from this manually intensive process to something that's more, automated, more effective, so it allows our people to engage in a more remote, environment. Because today, they really can't, because a lot of those processes are still so paper driven. So it's been disruptive in the way that we're trying to get our arms around how do we leverage RPA? How do we leverage IA and these other technologies so that we can provide that, that work-life balance for those individuals that do not, unfortunately, have the possibilities from working at home, as much as some others that are able to access technologies more easily. So we've really been, trying to figure out how do we, again, move ourselves in that space. Going back to, again, it's not just for USDA. It's for all this, the different agencies that we service in that space. So, we've made some progress, but it's definitely an area where we're looking and seeking to see how we can better leverage things like, optical character recognition to pull stuff in from these paper documents and populate, these different systems. And so, that I think in itself has been an area where we've been challenged in to be quite transparent. And because we have to figure out how to get away from that paper. And we've done it pretty good in the, again, I want to say the traditional CFO space where you're talking about budgets and system, but on the NFC side, it's a little bit more challenging. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. Jay, you and your organization have been one of the early adopters of RPA. Could you talk a little bit about the experiences that you've had and how that has affected how you do business today and some of the challenges that you face in the future?
Sure. So we've been able to implement AI, particularly robotics, with respect to several of our routine or paper-based transactions, mostly in my finance shop. And I'll just mention in particular our invoice processing, just the notion of routing invoices for approval, certification, receipt of goods. We've been able to basically program a robot to do that. And so what we've learned from that is, yes, it does help with efficiency. I think we actually were able to save a few FTEs in terms of the workload, just to, make sure that the receipt of invoices and the certification process runs more smoothly, and we don't have to have a human sending, emails, hundreds of emails across the agency on a weekly basis to facilitate that process. But what we've also found out is that those folks who were doing those jobs, those skills, they have to be reskilled. And you have to offer development, training, introduction of new work when you're introducing technology that takes basically some lower skilled work off the plate of a human being, and now you have a robot doing that work. So I think you have to not only think about the efficiency that you're putting in place, but you have to have a plan for those staff who were doing that work to migrate them to other work or more challenging work. And you have to offer them some training and development to make that transition.
Thank you. Fernandez, you over at the Bureau of Census have just started now in the journey of RPA. Can you share with the audience sort of what prompted you to start looking at RPA, and what are some of the early observations as the recent adopter?
Sure. So I think what prompted us the most is looking at our workload and looking at how much time was spent on manual data entry and the repetitive entries that the staff were doing. And the problem is it was taken away from the staff being able to say, this is what the numbers mean. This is what the data is saying that we can pass along to our customers. And just all of our time was spent there. And we've already seen, as we've gone down some of these processes that we're creating, we're already seeing that it's going to free up a lot of our time to do just that. Become more of a look at the data, analyze the data that we have, and actually use it for decision making, like Jay said earlier. And with doing that, we are finding that there are not only what we initially thought we were able to do on RPA, there are endless opportunities for us to use RPA within our organization. So it has been very enlightening as we've gone down this path. We're starting to see a reduction in the what I like to say low value output and more value put on the high value output. And staff morale, they're very excited about it because it's going to take away some of the redundant work that they were doing.
Tammy, the Bureau was actually one of the early adopters too of RPA, several years ago. But you also play a unique role across government in providing centralized services, whether it's in payments, do not pay, all of those functions which are heavily reliant on technology. Can you talk a little bit about how you're viewing the use of technology and the delivery of a variety of different programs that you do for agencies, and also then start talking a little bit, if you would, about what you think the challenges are with the technology in the future?
Certainly. Well, I think without the kinds of automation and automated tools that are available today, for example, the volume of payments that had to go out last year on the child tax credit and other programs, we would never have been able to make those dispersing processes. The use of analytics to ensure and various controls over identity to match bank accounts to make sure payments were going to the right places is it's all of that technology coming together in a process that from end to end ensures or does the best it can to ensure that the right amount of money gets to the right place. I think one of the challenges around it is, as you look at internal controls around the disbursement of, these huge volumes of payments, even the collection of payments, we have this new capabilities around identity and what does identity mean. And as you think about issues of equity and accessibility, to me, one of the bigger challenges is going to be how you balance technologies like facial recognition and identity confirmation with the fact that so much of the public that we serve may not have access to banks, may not have access to the types of automated tools and technologies that enable that kind of capability. And I think we have to address that because of our responsibility to provide service to everyone.
Thanks, Tammy. Jay, you mentioned in the discussion around RPA, you also mentioned other AI, machine learning. This is a question I'd like you to start with, but I'd like each of the panelists to address is, Are there innovations in AI that maybe haven't lived up to your expectations at this point in time?
So I've gotten a few demos, briefings, if you will, with respect to blockchain. I really haven't been able to latch on to that within my organization. I mean, seems to show a lot of promise, but I struggle with how it would fit with what I do. I think the greatest utility may be in the contracts area, but even with that, you sort of worry about security and privacy and different controls that you would need to have in place to really be able to leverage that technology. So I'm still struggling with, taking that next step with blockchain. I'd like to hear others' perspective.
Yeah. Lynn, do you have some observation on, beyond RPA, what have people been talking about, but we haven't yet seen the kind of impact that we've seen with RPA?
So I would have to definitely agree with Jay with blockchain. I haven't been able to really get anything going in the CFO space. I believe it has shown some promise in some other areas and maybe more the program areas. And, again, just being transparent with, we are still grappling around how do we get the data governance in place, because as you know, if the data is just all over the place for us. And we talk about big data, open data, and we're in this spiral of these data calls, right? Because we don't have the data in our system to really leverage the IA, so we're still trying to figure out, from a data governance perspective, how do we get our arms around and being proactive, I want to say, in what data we need. We know we definitely have no, issues and understand we need the financial data. We need the obligations. We need the expenditures. Those are like, that's a given. But then thinking through some of that qualitative data, especially as we go through a lot of the things that we're coming up on now, whether it's the American Rescue Plan, whether it's IIJA, whether, if it was CARES Act, whatever, all these new legislations come with it, a lot of data reporting, and we want to leverage, the RPA, we want to leverage IA, but we still have to get our arms around how do we make sure we got all the data proactively, not after the fact, but how do we figure out what we need for Buy America requirement? How do we figure out what we need in terms of making sure we can understand we're reaching all the underserved communities? Those are the things that, we really want to leverage RPA on, but we got to go back to the basics, I want to say, and make sure that we're really looking at how we holistically look at our data across a very huge, almost really decentralized department. I mean, it may be an easier task if it's a smaller department, but when we talk about these huge, like DHS's, the treasuries, the USDA, when you're talking about these huge departments, it gets a little bit more challenging to get your arms around all the data that you need kind of in a more proactive instead of a reactive kind of position. Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. Tammy, I know that the Bureau has been exploring a couple of initiatives with blockchain. Could you spend a few minutes and, talk to your fellow panelists about what you've been doing with blockchain, but also explaining to the audience what the Bureau sees as potential applications going forward?
I think the first blockchain pilot that seems to have some legs would be associated with grants and subrecipients. And that's where we're starting to lay out a pilot that would allow for the blockchain recognition of payments that would help clear up the prime award, the subawards under that, and provide that data back. And it's challenging in a couple of respects. You can see that if you could automate that process and subrecipient reporting became much easier, where you could get the payments to subrecipients much more efficiently at lower cost, you could gather that information quickly and report it out accurately and completely at the beginning of, as soon as a transaction occurs, that would be a huge advance given the amount of grants that the United States government funds across all of the agencies and departments. The challenge, to the earlier point made about data quality, and the ability for all of us to know, well, this subaward was made, these subrecipients need to be paid, and so on, is, I think, where one of our first big challenges to the pilot will lie. And I do think that the other piece to that, though, is around not just having that data, but has it been reported historically, and how do changes get picked up so that those automated processes can continue to work? I think the other piece to it, auditors, and how do we make these kinds of processes auditable so that they can get comfort on our controls over the transactions, is another step I think we need to engage. If we find that we can be successful on the small scale and we want to deploy at a larger scale, I think we want to make sure that GAO and our other audit organizations come along with us and are comfortable that the controls still exist in this automated payment exchange environment. And then I think lastly, the challenge around data history, and not just are we collecting it going forward, but do we have enough history so that we can perform the kinds of analysis we need to on recipients and subrecipients to meet all of our reporting requirements. And that, I think, too, also presents another challenge. But we're trying to structure a small enough test on a small enough scale, but also enough to show its real value. I think it could be potentially hugely transformational.
Thanks, Demi. Fernandez, any thoughts from your perspective on blockchain?
Yeah, I know that my team and I, we've had a couple of briefings on blockchain, especially in our internal use software, trying to identify our internal use software. But like everybody said, it's about getting that data in order first before you go down that route. We're a little ways out from that.
I want to address one of the questions that have already come in from one of the panelists, and Tammy, it goes to one of the comments that you made in a previous statement about the unbanked and, sort of the challenges that the Bureau faces in getting, benefits out to individuals. Clearly, Treasury's been playing and continues to play a critical role in the disbursement of relief funds. But I'd ask you to address that, but also, Lynn, you mentioned it as well in some of your programs. So maybe the two of you could sort of tag team and talk a little bit about this issue of, how do your respective organizations sort of reach that portion of the citizenry that, that are not banked?
So for us, we focused very heavily on the types of payment mechanisms that do not require bank accounts, debit cards that can be used to purchase items directly. And those types of low cost, no transaction cost payments to individuals who are recipients of any kind of assistance. The challenge, as I've said before, has to do with you have, in some cases, a population that does not have fixed addresses. And so one of the pieces of data that we've talked about missing is where can we reach people who are entitled to assistance, get to even send the debit cards. So the cards then went out, they were refillable with the types of assistance they were automatically downloaded to those. And so we were trying throughout this particular cycle to make sure that we were reaching everyone with the types of payments that type of payment mechanism that was most useful to them. I do think that the notions that we have to get to if we're going to serve the public fairly is that we have to be able to get money, right, in some way, shape, or form to a place where it can be picked up. And that's the other piece we have not yet really been able to tackle. And so I think we get back to this automation, but then there's that in-person contact, and how do we make that available if there are no other means? So we've been looking at creative solutions. Some of what we did was very effective and helped us to reach people. Some, I think, is still presents a lot of opportunities for us to think about down the road.
Yeah, I definitely resonated with a lot of what Tammy just mentioned. Using some of the same, things that she talked about, debit cards and other types of mechanisms to allow people to, again, get the resources they need. There's always the question of like eligibility, right? So we send out these payments, we send out these mechanisms, and then, we have to make sure through our internal controls, right, that, these people are getting to the intended expected parties. And so we're trying to put a greater focus on that because, we've been successful in getting the payments out, obviously, and so to those, even those that are unbanked. But we just need to balance that, right, with the internal control side of that and making sure, again, that we're mitigating to the extent possible the proper payments that come along with these payments that go out the door. So, yes, what she said, we're doing the same exact things within USDA. There's so many programs where, it's the WIC and the SNAP and things of that nature, or it's, farmers and producers getting payments for their crops and things. So we're looking and we're trying to make it easier for people to get the resources they need in their hands. But it does come with that trade-off of that balance that we have to do in terms of making sure we're using matching, these these different repositories or databases where we can match and make sure that we're not paying people more than one time for the same type of product or service. So, we have the mandate to make sure we serve our communities and get them the money that they need. But like I said, we do have to balance that with our internal control programs.
And I would also echo that as well. Ours is a little bit different. Ours isn't like mandatory programs, but as we try to reach people to do surveys, we still have a large cash management operation that comes along with internal controls that we have to rigorously keep up. But at the same time, we're trying to find out ways that we can reach people in those communities that isn't just a debit card, because some of them are unbanked and don't have ways of using debit cards and things like that. So we are struggling with the same thing, but we are looking to those different solutions so that we can reach the entire country when we are going out for survey responses. So same here with census.
Jay, in your earlier comment, you touched a bit on reporting, and I'd be interested in your observation over the last, 5 years or so. What have you seen in the way of changes with regard to reporting requirements, and also the analysis that goes along with the reporting?
Yeah, so definitely more of a demand for real-time reporting. The notion of just providing a monthly snapshot or even data, that's produced from an overnight batch process, can seem old. I think there's a high demand for, data hourly, sometimes within a few minutes after a transaction is posted. So I definitely think we have to move in that direction. We have to build more robust tools to satisfy the appetite for more real-time data. But also, just not data for the sake of a snapshot. I think Fernandez hit on this. What did the data tell us is really what's important now. Producing a report and handing it to someone without a story behind it really doesn't add much value. I think for those of us in the finance community, contracts and grants community, et cetera, we have to take the next step. We have to be able to do forecasts around data, look at trends, do some predictive analytics to facilitate decisions. And I think that's where we have to add value. The sake of reporting data for data, I think that the days of that are gone.
Lynn, do you want to build on Jay's comments about reporting and what you've seen over the last several years?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to piggyback on the comment that he made around predictive analysis, because that is something that we're looking to pilot in terms of one of our mission areas that do a lot of payments out the door, and how we can again mitigate improper payments, right? So we have some history, we have some data that we can then start to do some financial modeling around and do some predictive analysis around to see, okay, can we use prior root causes to inform us of what could happen if, in the future around some of these payments that go out the door. So that is, again, an area that we're looking to pilot within USDA and then see how we can potentially expand that. Because, I'm sure as many of you in your different organizations, we've been, trying to get that good and proper payment audit, but there's still some pockets where we are trying to improve those numbers and those scores. So I think the predictive analysis is something we're really heavily looking at in order to help us in that space. And also what he said around just the reporting. We want the reporting to be more self-service, if I can use that terminology. And so really leveraging and maturing our dashboards and, making sure that they can be refreshed more on an automated, fashion, so that whoever needs the data, they can just, I don't say push the button like it's that, but we want to be able to push the button and be able to update the dashboard and be able to get the data that they need. So we're looking at how can we make things more self-service as opposed to, again, going out and asking and running these reports. Let's have something that's more automated that can provide the information that our stakeholders need for decision making.
We've been talking about data and technology. I want to spend a couple minutes now talking about the workforce, and maybe the question, and for all of you, and I'm going to start with Fernandez, is, over the last couple of years, recruitment retention has been a challenge. It's been, even more of a challenge in this last 2 years with how we've had to pivot to remote work. I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts around lessons learned from the last 2 years in recruitment and retention, and what are some of the best practices that you've seen work within your organization? And maybe, Fernandez, could you start?
Sure. Well, when the pandemic hit, it really turned it upside down, and it changed the game as far as retention with our folks. And one thing that I've seen that my folks mainly ask is, when this is all over, how will we work? Will we all have to come back to work every day? And they're looking for that flexibility in their day-to-day lives with the work-life balance. And what we've seen is the hybrid approach is going to probably be the best approach for us as leadership, to get the work done and to still have the collaboration in person, but also allowing the flexibility for the staff to be at home and have those work-life balances. But we've looked at a gamut of things, and it's not just the telework. It is, what is the work like? What is the workloads like? And that's where RPAs and things like that are really coming into play. We're using that as a recruitment tool when we're going out and talking to folks, or even in an interview, we talk about RPA and ask them, how do they feel about RPA and technology and that sort. And you'll be really amazed at how it gets some folks really energized, and I think it helps them to want to come in and work with us. But also the culture. What type of culture are you building? We focused a lot on the culture that we're trying to build, and kind of being a finance officer of the future. We have things that are, like I heard Lynn talk about, dashboards, and it's not just we're a back office function. We're making our culture to where we are a part of the mission. We're trying to help with the mission instead of just being that back office function. So I think all those things that paired with training, and some people are being reskilled with these new technologies, are really helping us to come along as far as being a contender for a good place to work.
Amy, your observations and experiences?
Well, we spent a lot of years, several years, trying to redefine our future and be ready for the future that's coming. And of course, that's challenging, but it takes a lot of time and energy to think through roles and responsibilities, organizational interaction. Are we thinking about the enterprise? Are we thinking in our, operational silos? And trying to come to a model that makes sense. And so we've created some new offices. We're shifting some responsibilities. We're trying to teach new skills, particularly on the technology and data fronts, because those are places where we all agree, I think, we have to move our workforce from processing transactions to analysis. And whether it's lots and lots of data or other types of problem solving, we have to move this workforce in a direction. Many of them have the capability, and so it's presenting the opportunities to acquire the skills and apply them in a way that's meaningful. And for a lot of the workforce, that is a stimulation to stay. But if we go away from a model in which we are place-based, right? We don't reopen our offices or we allow remote work anywhere. All of a sudden, the competition for our highly skilled staff becomes much greater. And we will be facing what other industries faced years ago when we started offshoring manufacturing facilities, right? Now our folks, no matter where they live, can be employed by someone other than us. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to be sensitive to the types of culture and other things that keep people with us, even as we provide those workplace flexibilities. And we have to enrich our jobs and make each job as far as it can go. One other thing we're doing is, one thing that tight budgets have kind of forced us to do is to think about shifting our staff internally and creating opportunity to move around our organization. I mean, we're big enough that we can offer a fair diversity of positions and allow those internal candidates to compete for the various positions that we have open and perhaps set themselves down a new career path. And I think the combination of that kind of the cultural piece of it, the opportunity piece of it, the workforce and workplace of the future piece of it are all things that lead to greater retention and job satisfaction. The pay scale, of course, and our need to compete with the private sector are going to be challenges until there is a change in government-wide policy. So we have to have other things to offer that make us good places to work.
Jay, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, everything that the folks have said thus far resonates with me. I would just add, I think we have to think about moving away from looking at our staff in the finance community and budget community as purist accountants or purist budget analysts. The work has to be more challenging. I think that we have to provide opportunities to integrate more with direct mission. I think, those of us in the finance world have to be viewed as strategic partners and add value in terms of strategy and not just be number crunchers, if you will. So I think that will be important for staff retention and even for recruitment. As folks, particularly high achievers, look for opportunities, I don't think they're going to be attracted to organizations where, they're going to sit in front of a spreadsheet all day, whether it be in the office or at their home. They're going to want challenges that push their skill sets beyond, reconciling numbers or producing reports. So I really think we have to think along those lines.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that was stated, so I won't repeat but every person has some great points that I definitely agree with. And, we come to a point where, at one point telework was the carrot, right? It was like if you offer telework, it was like that was the incentive. But now everybody, and so it's like, so what do we now do to kind of distinguish ourselves from each other? So I'm not only competing with all the other federal agencies, I'm even competing within USDA, for, good people to come and work for us. So we're, in addition to what was all stated by my other panelists here, we're looking at what other kind of, incentives can we, is it student loan type repayment? Is it just the tuition, something to make us stand out from, just the typical say, well, yeah, you can work from home. Well, everybody's allowing you to work from home, so we have to be more creative. But I totally agree with what Jay said too, is like the work has to be meaningful. So, we're looking at a myriad of things to have our organizations stand out and say, yeah, come work for us because we offer this, we offer that. But, it's like we're stealing people from each other. I'm just people have so many choices. And it's like, unless you can really, say, okay, this is what you'll be able to do. This is how you'll grow in your career, especially for people that are just starting out in government. Then we're already behind the curve. So I agree with all that was stated, and it's not an easy task, but we're doing some piloting of some things within OCFO, within our organization, that we're hoping will garner us some fruit in terms of some good resources.
Thank you, Lynn. And we're coming up close to the hour, so we have 3 or 4 questions from the audience that we're unfortunately not going to get to, but we will, for those who've submitted them, provide answers within a week or so. But I'd like to ask the panel one question as we conclude the session. And that goes back to the technology question. What do you envision as the biggest challenges for your organization in adopting technology? Let's start, Fernandez, with you.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is, not to pick on my OCIO friends, but the infrastructure that we're working with for the technology, but also change management. There is, for some folks, there is a ingrained, I have to do this. If a robot is doing it, you're taking my job. And that's not the case. It's we either reskilling or freeing up time for other folk, for you to do other things and do more analysis and know, like I said before, know what the numbers really mean. So I think those are the 2 biggest challenges that we face with it.
Jay?
I think we have some risk of data overload. I think we have to figure out how to integrate data from multiple data sets and even disparate data sets, because I think there's going to be a huge demand for that. But we're going to have to figure out how to integrate it in an intelligible way, access it and make sense of it, and then, of course, leverage it to inform decision making. I think that's going to be a huge challenge. I think we have a lot of stovepipe systems right now, but I think there's a high demand to break down those stovepipes and essentially have, like, for IT types, a data lake, if you will, where people just go in and get data. But then, how do you make sense of data that's sitting in a big pool? We're going to have to figure that out.
Lynn and then Tammy.
So probably come to no surprise that, budget, money, being able to pay for the things, the infrastructure. I think Jay talked about the infrastructure. I mean, within USDA, we do have some antiquated systems that really would have to be totally modernized to be able to take advantage of these newer technologies. And so we try to reach out to things like the TMF fund and other kind of resources, but absent of getting that funding, it's going to be piecemeal. And sometimes, it'll take longer to get to where we're trying to get to because we don't have the investment up front to be able to put into those systems.
Thank you. Tammy?
I think to the money issue and sort of that intervention window when you've got both a legacy technology and a new technology at the same time, and the cost of both of those as you're trying to transition is what I call the intervention window is very expensive. I also think skill sets. Not that we can't grow them, but sometimes you need that person to come in that's got the capability and can show how to use the technology. So I think the notion of a pilot, the notion of someone who can sort of lead your thinking down the path of the advantages is also a challenge for us. We are, as we all said, competing in a larger world that is also adopting these technologies. And so it's hard for us to attract and retain the skills we need in all of the diverse technology areas.
Thank you, Tammy. So we're just about out of time. And I'd like to, first of all, thank our panelists for their participation. I know we probably could have gone on for another hour if we had the time, but thank you for the very rich conversation. And I want to say to each and every one of you and to the general audience of federal employees who for the last 2 years have done a remarkable job of delivering their critical missions in each and every one of their components in a time that is unprecedented in our history in facing this pandemic and the economic situation that many parts of our economy have experienced. So on behalf of AGA and myself, thank you for what you do, not only over the last 2 years, but what you do in the future. Thank you.